What is the most severe case of someone being completely out of touch with reality you've ever seen? The pastor of a small town church insisted that members set up the parish hall and provide food and beverages for 125 people after every Sunday service, even though the average attendance was only around 20 people. Week after week, month after month, much food would be disposed of, and large urns of coffee dumped down the sink, and all because the pastor was in denial about the reality of weekly attendance. He should have invited members of the community in need to come eat for free. It probably would have boosted attendance a bit. Edit. Thanks stranger for my first award lol. I will never forget the man who angrily told me, a wheelchair user with no feet and no prosthetics, to go down the stairs if I didn't want to wait for the elevator. I had been talking to my friend and mentioned we were going to be a little late because of the huge line. Edit. Holy shit, I was not expecting this much of a response. Thank you everyone. There's so many comments, so I'll answer a few of the reoccurring ones here if that's okay. As far as I could tell, the guy wasn't blind. I know most of these comments were a joke, but there were a few that were asking genuinely. It's not impossible, you can't always tell, but he turned around and made direct eye contact with me, which indicated he at least realized I was 3 foot tall at the most, so I was either a little person or in a wheelchair, both of which probably shouldn't be using the stairs at that time. The stairs were like a stampede of people. It was a central city station in my city at peak hour, and it was busier than usual because of less trains at the time. Even if I had my prosthetics, I would not have been able to safely get down without being pushed over. Tone is hard to get across on text, so I understand the confusion there, but I made the comment to my friend simply to inform her we were late for work. I wasn't passive-aggressively trying to guilt people. I don't think I should get to cut in line, or whatever. The tone I used was more we are running late, but what can you do? Before the guy interrupted, I was about to tell my friend I wouldn't mind if she went on ahead. Just some context. As for what the guy was thinking, no clue. There's a huge wheelchair sports program in that area, so people in wheelchairs are very common, and many are ambulatory wheelchair users, meaning they can walk for a little while, but not very well / safely / for very long. It's very common for those people, and myself if I'm wearing my prosthetics and using my chair, to get hailed for faking it, so maybe that's what he was thinking? That I was somehow faking? Honestly, I have no idea. As I said before, he was looking right at me when he said it. What happened afterwards, he glared at me for a few seconds. I was too surprised to say anything in return. He seemed to have a moment of realization and awkwardly turned back around to face the door. My friend and I had a good chuckle over it after he was out of earshot. Fine, I will. Rolls toward the stairs and just falls down all of them. Parents of a 35-year-old woman who was hospitalized after suffering severe anoxic brain damage 20 years ago. She had been in the same ward since, barely conscious. They refused to get her transferred to a more suitable facility for 20 years, saying that there's no reason to do so. Those facilities are for lost causes, and their daughter is going to make a full recovery, finish school, get married and be totally fine. Working in hospitals got me quite a collection of these stories, but this one I thought was one of the saddest ones. You said she's 35 and was hospitalized 20 years ago, so the woman was 15 when she was admitted. Those poor parents. That's heartbreaking. In college, I had a roommate from the most sheltered part of Long Island. We met an exchange student from Switzerland, and I swear to God she said this in complete seriousness. Oh wow, I didn't know people actually lived in Switzerland. I thought there were just banks there. Most sheltered part of Long Island. I'm guessing the Hamptons? This was from a regional manager of Starbucks after they removed merit-based raises that could go up to a 5% increase, changed to a flat 2% increase. When she asked if people liked the new raise plan, I said actually no, they feel unmotivated with no reason to perform any better than just normal. Regional manager, your staff need to realize working isn't about money. If working isn't about money, why would the company decrease raises from 5% to 2%? To make more money, that's right. My cousin was spoiled and sheltered her entire childhood through college. Then her parents stupidly cut the leash without any preparation and released her into society. She quickly got in trouble for bouncing checks all over town. My mom picked her up and asked why the hell she was writing bad checks everywhere. Turns out my cousin was under the impression that as long as you had checks in your checkbook, you had money in your account. She didn't understand that you deposit in a number and then can spend or withdraw up to that amount. Please teach your kids basic finance. Note, this was like 1996, before it turns into a who writes a check anymore discussion. You can basically replace check with credit card and it's updated for present times. Apparently there are people who think that they are just free money. Credit card at the limit? Time to open up another one. There is a girl at my work that always bitches about not making enough BC. She makes 200 to 300 a paycheck. Then is always the first to leave early and always shows up late and has other PPL take her shifts. She asked me how I make 600 to 800 a paycheck. I said BC I work more. I'm currently at work taking over her shift. She doesn't realize if you don't work more you'll be paid less. I've worked with a few people like that. Some who've gotten angry with me making more due to being there 3x as long and working twice the hours. My sister grew up with everything handed to her and literally cried when her first car wasn't the color she wanted. Married Rick. Can't fathom why I can't take off work whenever it suits me and says stuff like I wouldn't ask my boss for a week off. I would tell him I'm taking the week off. I wouldn't ask my boss for a week off. I would tell him I'm taking the week off. Oh my god, how come I never thought of that? Work with a girl who is a flat earther and on top of that denied the existence of space. When the topic came up and I disagreed, she asked if I had ever been there. Obviously I haven't. I told her I have also never been to Japan and that does not mean it doesn't exist. She complained to management about my intolerance of her beliefs. Worked with a guy like this. Basically gravity doesn't exist and the moon is a hologram and we live in some sort of Truman Show dome. Because that makes much more sense. My old boss at the time was a girl of 26 who got $4 million from her mom a year to play with. Her mom is very wealthy in China. Her daughter is here trying to be a CEO of a company for funsies. I accidentally got a job at that company. One day she told us we were all going on a group outing for bonding. She took us to an outlet mall 4 hours away. Told the rest of us 7 people that she was going to go shop and she'd see us later. That was code for don't follow me, duckers. Every 2 hours she'd let us know she was going to go and load her bags to the giant van they rented and would group text us telling us we can meet her there to unload as well. We all get paid under 50k. We have nothing to unload. By lunch she had proceeded to fill up the van with cheese. She then asks me where all my new stuff is and I said I'm budgeting right now. She goes take out a credit card and go shop. That's the American way. Seriously. Okay. By 9 PM her bags were taking up people's seats and they had to sit with her stuff. She spent 30k. The rest of us spent about $70. We were tired and bored and cold. To this day I still believe she thinks she did something nice for us and doesn't understand how polarizing and not at all team bonding that was. I'm sure there was a lot of team bonding involved, just not with her. My parents paid for half the down payment on my house, pay for our landscaper, house cleaner, child daycare, car insurance and give my wife and our monthly allowance. We're completely self-sufficient human beings who even try and give other friends financial advice. Obviously written in the voice of someone I know. Sounds like the kind of person who when asked for financial advice would reply with, just get more money, because for them, it really is that simple. Had a friend who insisted she was in a relationship with a C-list celebrity, whom she met once during a comic convention. All the celebrity's Instagram and Twitter posts were for her and everything had a meaning behind it. When the celebrity got married, she said that it was just for the media, so she and celebrity could live a quiet life. When he didn't do anything for her birthday, she had a breakdown. She went to therapy not long after. These symptoms are called delusions of reference and fear, very common. My sister-in-law, kicked out by her boyfriend, comes to stay with us for a few days. We suggest looking for a flat/cheap house to rent near us. She won't live in the scummy part of town near us. Shed like a 3-bed house with garden in the best part of town. She has no savings and isn't sure if she has a job. Was a part-time cashier in a supermarket. Stopped going to work when COVID came. Note, not furloughed. Supermarket still open. She's just not going in. When I suggested maybe she couldn't afford $500k on a family home on her salary, she suggested she'd just get a council house. Disregarding the huge waiting list and the fact that most council properties are either ghetto parts of town. This is just the crust of a deep layer of unhinged fantasy world that she lives in. My brother on his own, let's just take his rich fiancé out of the equation, can't afford to even live where he currently rents cause he's on minimum wage. I worked my ass off to buy my house on my own. After working multiple jobs and saving up, he called my new area a hole in front of my entire family, when in reality, if he was dumped by his fiancée, he wouldn't even be able to afford a bedsit. Biggest snob. My dad gave him a super expensive award-winning bottle of wine and he texted him saying it tasted ducking awful. My brother is in tons of debt, but cause his fiancé's family is wealthy, he's acting like he's part of the elite and looks down on where I live, which is a lovely affordable working class town BTW. Deleted. This is my sperm donor. Called me a lay retard who never got off the computer when I tried to teach myself how to code. He's only worked one dead-end job in his life, where he just has to show up, while I had 2 jobs at the time that were physically demanding, while my mom took all the money from my paychecks and said I could get it back as an allowance that I never saw. I'm still chiz at coding, but at least I have a better job, get to keep the money from my paycheck, and cut off their toxic ease. My parents' neighbor thought that her garden was too small for her sons to play in. So when she met my parents for the first time, the first thing she actually said was, "Can you give me some of your garden so my sons have more space to play in?" Thankfully my parents just said no. For context, they live in a very expensive neighborhood where houses cost on average from $750,000 to $1 million. The gardens in that neighborhood are a lot bigger on average than the majority of gardens in the UK. I've never heard a story of somebody being as painfully out of touch as that woman. Edit. There's a lot of comments from Americans clarifying what our gardens actually are. A British garden is what you guys call a backyard. Gotta be careful with people like that. They'll just keep asking for more and more. Like they say, give someone an inch and they'll take a yard. My stepbrother got into a weird Gnostic religious group and thought he could convert people by talking to them, harrowing them, Socrates style, except without any ability to carry out a philosophical conversation. Also, warming workplace is a fine occasion to do this. When he'd get fired from his temp jobs, he'd omit a conspiracy and fight against enlightenment. This is more funny than deluded as a side note, but one of the group activities is to have to rewrite their religious book by hand, which he diligently did, and it wasn't a small book either. Turned out he used the wrong coloring, which for some reason invalidated the whole thing. Got a job in a restaurant as a waiter. Armed for whatever unimaginable reason that the proper way to act for waiters is to bow after taking the order. When his supervisor asked him to stop, he lectured the supervisor on proper waitstaff manners, wanted to propose to a 50-plus-year-old woman who has until then shown no signs of being interested in him. Luckily he believed in the tradition to first ask father's permission, so he asked his dad, who talked him out of it, had an idea to join the military to convert them from the inside. At one point believed the sun rays can sustain you, but luckily never really bothered to practice it. Is totally against capitalism and wants to live a free life as a wandering philosopher rather than live as a working drone like everyone else. However, does believe the working drones in his family should support his noble pursuit, while also chastising them for selling out and more. Luckily he believed in the tradition to first ask father's permission, so he asked his dad, who talked him out of it. Wait, he asked his own father for permission? That's an impressive multi-level screw up, which ended up working out for the better. I used to work at a software company in downtown Boston. One of the best perks of the job at the time was the flexibility in hours. Many folks had regular WFH days. Myself, I knew I could drop my kids off at school, get into the office by 9:30 and my boss had no issue with it whatsoever. Others with kids had similar arrive late or leave early schedules depending on their childcare. After a few years a new CEO comes in, spends a month observing how the office works, then calls for a company-wide meeting. During the meeting she tells everyone she believes having a full office 8 to 5 is the most productive environment, and at the start of the next month, all WFH was cancelled, and she wanted everyone in the office during those set hours. No showing up late or leaving early. A lively debate ensued, with discussions of there being very little warning, to pleas of flexibility, to concerns of making necessary childcare arrangements, especially given that in many cases, i.e. schools, we couldn't adjust those times. Plus, commuting into Boston sucks. After listening to all of these arguments, she finally responds with a long speech of appreciating the sacrifices everyone has to make to better the company, everyone doing their part, blah blah blah. She ends it by saying, "I understand where you're all coming from. Years ago when my kids were little, my husband and I had to hire 3 nannies to cover all of the times we had to work. I remember we all looked around at each other, speechless. It was also the moment I realized I would have to start looking for another job." When the millionaire CEO thinks hiring 3 nannies is a relatable example to her middle-class employees, it's pretty clear she's not going to change her mind. /edit Holy crap, I've been on Reddit for 5 years and never gotten more than 100 or so upvotes on a post before. I believe this is also where I say thank you kind stranger for my first gold. I once had a boss tell a personal anecdote about accidentally buying a $1.200 pair of designer jeans. Until he saw the receipt, he tells us, chuckling, had been thinking the jeans would only cost half that amount. He paused for nods and laughter. We underpaid overworked sclubs just tried to awkwardly look somewhere else. I worked on shifts with a guy for years who thought every single person was out to get him. I've never met anyone who had such a warped sense of reality. He would joke on with someone, then go away for the weekend and stew on one particular thing, then come in on Monday absolutely raging over taking something the complete wrong way. I've seen him attack 2 people and heard about a third. Thing is, Hez so dopey. Everyone thinks Hez harmless and that's just the way he is. A guy I trained as an apprentice has just started on shifts with him. Doesn't take anyone being a Rick well at all. I think they'll do well together, haha. I worked with a guy exactly like that. His mind misconstrued every experience he'd had in life. He also didn't understand time zones. I went to a private international school in London as a teenager. Most kids there had parents working good jobs, but in between them were some filthy rich kids with parents in the oil industry or something similar. In 8th grade we were talking about our Easter break and my friend from Belgium was talking about how his family had decided last minute to go there over the break, but had decided to drive there because there were no flights available. Then this Russian billionaire classmate of mine asked him, "Why don't you take a private jet?" She was so clueless when we started laughing. Edit. Grammar. International schools are prime hunting grounds for out-of-touch people. A friend of my mum's was a school counselor at an international school in Indonesia. They were organizing a school trip for the year 9, 13-year-olds, top dollar school, so top dollar trip at a fancy hotel. One of the parents come in and ask her about the toilet situation. She replies saying each room has an ensuite, so the kids will be fine. The mother then replies, "But who will wipe his bottom?" Turns out this kid had a maid who slept at the end of his bed at night and would wipe his privileged ass for him. Edit. Thanks for the award kind stranger. My most popular comment on Reddit is a cheese story. A woman I knew a few years ago. She had a job. She was convinced she was supposed to be a movie star. She never did any acting, though. She also told me about the married man that she had slept with. He loves me, but he can't leave his wife. She actually did stop having sex with him, but they still hung out. Oof. I had a friend who started having an affair with a married man several years ago. That's a special kind of delusional. You have to convince them that 1. Their dream man is actually an a-hole. He's breaking his wedding vows and tearing apart his family for some side pussy. 2. He's not going to leave his family for you. If he wanted to leave his wife, he would do it. 3. You're not in a relationship. Sneaking off to hotels, giving him BJs in his car, and having you text his burner phone that he keeps in the trunk of his car is not a relationship. One bully of a boss asking the 3 people who suffered most from his behavior if they would want to move to a new employer with him as a team. HMM. How about no way in hell? This happened at my work too. Apparently had no idea that the people he overworked would not jump at the chance to quit their current job at an established company to work with him at a startup that he had not even created yet. I knew someone who unironically tried to convey that not only is Pokemon demonic, but they exist in real life and there are reported cases of them attacking and harming people. Sounds like the area I grew up in. Pokemon cards were a rarity because all the parents that found any would burn them. We had like a black market for them at school. I traded half my collection for a Pikachu from the 90s written in Japanese. Now a foreign card was a once in a lifetime find, let alone one from the 90s. So I guarded that thing with my life. Still have it, even though it's a little beat up. My soul legit believes she's a strong independent businesswoman who owns 3 major businesses. She does 3 MLM gigs. Edit. Thanks for the silver. The irritating thing is that I actually do have a brick and mortar business that I've been running for 5 years now, and she's always giving me business advice and pushing me to join her for these amazing opportunities. It's so stereotypically obnoxious. OMG hun, I totally understand the grind. Yeah, I bet you do. All said while wearing brightly horrendous outfits, caked on makeup, and smelling like decaying frankincense. Wow. Her so must have tons of disposable income. An ex became really religious, and I'd still talk to her sometimes. Somehow the topic of flat earth theories came up, and she said she thinks it's actually possible that it could be true. I tried to explain that we have more than enough imagery and data indicating that the earth is round, and she said it could all be planted there by Satan. You just can't come up with a response to that. And she said it could all be planted there by Satan. Tell her, hey, that sounds just like something Satan would say. Let me see your forehead. My friend stole my card information and bought loads of expensive stuff. I asked her if it was her before reporting it, knowing that she was going through a tough time and I wanted to give her a chance to make it right and that I could be in trouble for conspiracy to fraud if I reported it, and they believed I'd got stuff delivered to my friend to claim fraud for the money back. She said no, I thought someone else had done it, so I reported it. When she got arrested she said she didn't think they'd take the fraud thing so far. She thought you could just call up banks to get the money back and they wouldn't investigate. Wow, they are really anal about this identity theft thing. Who knew? Deleted. You mean I shouldn't take all of the advice I see on r/relationship/s? My friend suffered a psychotic break when we were teenagers. Had been smoking weed constantly for a couple of weeks, not eating or sleeping, and I think he had some underlying mental health issues anyway, but that routine just sent him over the edge. Before his parents had him admitted to hospital, he came and met us before we were going out to a gig. He was wearing a pink silk pajama shirt and jogging bottoms and just looked very unwell. He was rambling on about the discoveries he was making and that he was going to meet some scientist in America. Then he laid on the pavement in the middle of the street and told us we all had to lie down to conserve the Earth's energy. That was about 15 years ago. He runs a successful business now. Wow. I'm so glad for him. He must have worked really hard to be where he is now. I was a stable hand of a very upper tier barn in a wealthy part of the country. The staff have to sign non-disclosure agreements to protect clients. On one particularly scorching July day, I overheard a client venting to another about how she was incredibly stressed and going to have a mental breakdown because her first choice catering company was all booked up for the weekend of her last minute yacht party. I'm paycheck to paycheck and had probably a total of 3 days off since Christmas. I would love for a yacht party to be my basis for a mental breakdown. Needless to say, the staff had a healthy chuckle on that one. That reminds me of a marketing manager I once worked under once I got into my field for real. One of her multi-million-dollar houses was in Nantucket, and that's where she was one summer when we had a nasty storm. She complained to me over the phone that she was so stressed. I asked why, and her one example was that she had to load her own dishwasher after a party she'd had prior to the storm because the weather was too bad for her maids to come in. I'm fairly convinced that my current shift supervisor thinks anyone who works an overtime shift is doing it out of loyalty to the company and not because of the 5x pay rate. At my company everything above 40 hours is 100% more, so double rate. If I understood you correctly, this is standard because we know that's how much his contractor pays him for our overtime, so nobody will work unless paid that. At this one project he needs a bunch of guys for a couple of weekends, but will only pay 50%, so 1/5 the rate, but nobody want to give up their weekends for that. So he calls me because I have put in a lot of overtime before. One weekend equals to 40 hours normal pay, which is ducking awesome when the paycheck arrives, and he asks me why I won't work and tells him like it is, you don't pay enough and it's always been 100%. And he more or less scream in the phone, where the duck is your loyalty to the company? LMAO, I couldn't believe it. And that's something me and my co-workers still have a good laugh at years later every time we get together for drinks, lol. Streamer that I watched a couple of times before his behavior drove me to stop. It was a shame because when he was actually gaming, I liked the content, but his attitude drove you up the wall, and by attitude, I mean raging. Back when I watched him, the rest of the events in this post hadn't happened yet, but the out of touch with reality part, he talked about his girlfriend on stream a few times. Nothing wrong with that, except his girlfriend was a female streamer who lived in Europe. He was from the States, and he'd never actually met her in his life. She got wind of this through shared viewers and debunked the story on her stream, saying she'd never even interacted with him. This caused him to go nuts and start stalking the girl wherever he could, causing her to eventually stop streaming, delete all her social media and so on. After his Twitch account was banned for this, he eventually managed to convince Twitch to unban him and then did the same thing to a different girl. Now he's been permanently banned from Twitch as a result of this, again, and keeps raging about it on Twitter. Just to clarify, I don't follow this guy, but someone posts about him on the game subreddits every now and then, which is why I know the story. Some people are just bananas. It upsets me way more than it probably should that those other two streamers had their livelihood/hobby ruined by some creep. I'm a mental health therapist who works with severe mental health diagnoses such as schizophrenia, etc. So I've met a lot of people who aren't in touch with reality, but in the question is more about people who appear to have their wits about them and just are very unaware about the realities of life. I have a sad one. My female cousin who was getting married was the very shy, nice, but not popular kid. She also didn't attend family events or really build relationships with anyone. She was marrying a gentleman very similar to her, but with a wiener. However, her family was pretty well off, and their older son just had a huge expensive wedding with about 200 guests. Even though she asked for a small wedding, her family invited all these family members, etc. And even though they didn't get any RSVPs back, they still went all out on venue and food and entertainment. Apparently it was the same with the groom, wanted small wedding and did not have much of a social group/family. Apparently when wedding day came there were only about 10 to 15 guests in a venue, set up to entertain and feed over 150 people with an open bar. Bride and groom did not drink. Bride and groom were both extremely inebriated, and it ruined the whole day for them given how awkward and quiet it was. My immediate family wasn't invited to the event. My family sucks, but that's a different story. But I always just felt really bad for her. Neither the bride or groom were bad people, but they were just reserved and private people that had a very special day ruined by oblivious parents. Side note, a few years later, after building successful careers and coming out of their social shells, they had a pretty wonderful small renewal of vows in a gorgeous location with select friends and family. I'm glad they found each other. Alright, so this is a story of the first hearing I ever been to. My adversary was represented by an established solo attorney from a different state. We will call him Jude. I had spoken to him a few times over the phone before and considered him competent and a passionate advocate. So I meet Jude at the courthouse with co-counsel. I'm a woman, and so is she, to basically shoot the chiz waiting for trial call. First thing Jude says, "Hi." Second thing, "I gotta show you a picture of my wife." Okay. Now, Jude is in his early 60s, small, bald. He takes out his phone and shows us a photo of this little girl who he owes us is 20, but looks all of 15. He tells us she's from Dominica. As we stare at him, he unpromptedly relates to us a hilarious anecdote about going to the mall and her begging him to buy her stuff while calling him daddy. You see, dude thought we would be impressed. We were not impressed. Oh yeah, someone did that to me once. Except he was probably a kid and it was on a Minecraft server. Dude sound like a real piece of work. This is my time to shine. So I grew up with a lot, or restrictions that at the moment, had no idea the options existed. For example, I was only allowed 2 options of shoes, but the catch was that I need to make the right choice, or that I can make friends on my own, not needing to be told this is your new friend now so go play with them. Sadly my dad kept me in a small box, and he was the only one allowed to control what would go into that box or come out. So when I was 10 CPS was involved and was taken into foster care. That's when my world exploded. I didn't know truly how bad it was until they took me to a shoe store and told me to pick out ones I liked. I swear for the life of me, I had no clue what to do. I stood there for what felt was hours until they noticed and asked what my favorite color was. I said green because that was what my father told me I liked. But I guess I was too overwhelmed that I just remember saying yes to everything and ended up with ugly brown and pink sneakers. What children learn to do at their normal age is what I'm just figuring it out in my 20s. So reality was a hard thing to live because the whole time I was in my dream world. Holy duck. Hope you're doing better now. My father. He is an habitual liar. I somehow think he believes his own lies. Over the past couple of years I've noticed he doesn't actually have anything new to say. Sort of regurgitates sentences in slightly different ways. It's caused his business to fail. He lied to everyone that was employed there saying he had to liquidate the company. Going so far as to tell people he met with lawyers and the process has been started. I did some digging and found out there were no lawyers or liquidation. He just tried to duck the system. I have no contact with him, but my brother says he is still trying to use the same tactics. I just feel he believes everything. Sort of like living in his own head. Very sad that he damaged lives in the process. Your father sounds a lot like my father. This is a positive one. A bunch of medical trainees are learning how to perform a pelvic exam on a female patient. The lectures emphasize non-sexual terms and how to perform an exam in the most professional and non-traumatic way possible. A male student complained that he didn't understand why we were being so picky. I realized that no one had explicitly said many people have been raped or sexually assaulted, so we don't want to re-traumatize them. So I said that, and we discussed how, even if he doesn't mean to, he can scare or hurt an already traumatized person, and how he can never tell, and 30% or more of women have a history of assault or abuse. He had never known this, and once I got through to him, I could tell it really shook him. Months later, prostate exam lectures were much less professional, much more her butts. He came to me and asked why they were different. Couldn't men be assaulted also? Prompted some complaints and some change in policy. Good man. Edit. I hope you can see this as inspiring as I do, that many beliefs and behaviors can be modified by respectful conversation that meets someone where they are. Also, so sorry, I mixed up my stats. Most recent data states 20% of women have been raped. 80% have been sexually assaulted. I'm happy to edit this if I get better data. NSVRCNPR. At least this guy understood. My boss's wife 28. She grew up in a wealthy family and married to a man who was third generation owning the company he was in. They were a regional power, etc. She was talking to a staff that in general made $36K a year, mumbling about a staffer who was on his honeymoon. Tennessee. Ha. Tennessee. She looked around the room for everyone to join in. My god. How did she agree to that? We did Hawaii and that was least I told him was acceptable. I hope there was a moment of awkward silence, or did the others actually join in? I had a fat, ugly, unemployed friend who believed he deserved a perfect 10 girlfriend. He only asked out women that were way out of his league. It was so cringy. He truly had no self-awareness. In the club he would walk up to supermodel types and ask them out and would come back angry when he was, always, shot down. He eventually moved to Brazil because he was convinced American women were too smug to appreciate his excellence. And the crazy thing was that he wasn't just playing any confidence is sexy game or anything. He 100% believed in this. He saw himself as a god. Some people miss 100% of the shots they do take. My stepfather's grandpa suffered from psychosis in a strange way. He wasn't able to distinguish mirror reflections from real life. He would often be found talking to the mirrors, his reflection, for hours. Later on, he wasn't allowed to have any mirrors because he would believe that that man was there to kill him and often would turn violent. Turn violent as in he would start punching and clawing against the mirrors. Nurse here. Sadly, this behavior is very common in individuals suffering with some sort of dementia. I had a neighbor once that was convinced I was flirting with him and wanted to be with him. He got all of this from the one-word verbal exchange we would have while getting our mail, which was basically saying hi. Keep in mind that at the time I was a minor in high school and he was probably well into his 20s. He proceeded to harrow and stalk me. Examples: messaging me on Facebook declaring his love for me and feeling wronged because I was playing hard to get. He would knock at our house door when he knew my parents weren't home and tried to lure me out so that he could just talk to me. Searched me up on all my social media accounts and tried to contact me. He used my last name from our mailbox and searched for me. It did not help that we lived in the same building. I got so scared that I could no longer go outside for a run like I usually did. I filed a police report and his family asked mine to please forgive his son. This completely freaked me out and my family decided to move. Edit to clarify, I had just turned 16 and the guy was probably 25 to 26-year-olds at the time this happened. Hey, we know our son is a pedophile who has been stalking and harrowing your daughter, but could you please forgive him? At the risk of giving an answer that's too real, my grandmother with Alzheimer's. We're in the stages now where it's basically a given that she's not aware of what's going on. She'll ask about people who aren't there, reference things that didn't happen, or get fussy because she's late for something that occurred years ago. Don't get me wrong, it's hard, but it's nowhere near as hard as it was a few years back. Now, it's easier to deal with entirely because it's easier to disregard what she's saying, and we're all better practiced at it. A few years ago, when she didn't remember my name for the first time, or when she remembered that she should recognize me, but was lucid enough to try and hide the fact she didn't recognize me, that was difficult. So now, it's safe to say that she's not terribly in touch with our modern settings, but she's still very friendly, and I feel like I have a duty to make sure she's not lonely or scared. I remember when my grandma parted from that. She was generally very quiet and confused, and she was staying with my aunt. But whenever my aunt was playing music she would want to get up and dance, so they would both gently dance together in a way she wouldn't hurt herself, and I always thought that was really sweet. Deleted. Haha, that last line is cherry on the cake. I'm guessing he always mispronounced duck. Let me join in. Fuck you goddamn loser. I dated this girl who believed her roommates were spying on her. That every time they had friends over and were hanging out in the common space and laughing, it was because they were spying on her in her room. She also believed the government was spying on her and her parents directly. Us dating lasted about a week and ended, not just because the red flags, but because she tried to drop by unannounced after only being on a couple dates. That sounds like serious mental health issues. Oof. Working in a pharmacy. Hello. Can I get the yellow ones please? Sorry, could I get your name first? It doesn't matter, I just need the yellow round ones. Did you have a prescription? No. I always get them here, little yellow round ones. It went on like this for literally 20 something minutes. Here's what I found out in that time. By little yellow round ones, he meant red/orange circular Xarelto tablets. He had been on a lower dose a couple of years ago. He had not filled the yellow ones in over 18 months. There was one dispense tech who knew his name and knew his doctor. By sheer coincidence, she'd greeted him every time he came in for the last 2 to 3 years. He physically had no idea how a pharmacy works. He'd only even been to this one, only ever picked up one medication, and only through one tech who knew the doctor sent his scripts through every few months. It was surreal, explaining reality to somebody who by pure fortune had never experienced it. Hello. Can I get the yellow ones please? You've also just described what it's like to work in a library. Logan Paul thinking that putting up a video of a suicide victim was a good idea to his mostly child to preteen audience. Yeah, I know he apologized, but the guy literally spent time editing the footage before uploading it, thinking it would be good idea. WTF. This pisses me off so much. Literally had arguments on Reddit by people who weren't his fans because it was a mistake. None of that was a mistake. It happened. We have had time to get used to it, but by God, was it ducked up? By God, is it ducked up? Like so many choices had to be made for that to happen, and people claim has fine. The nunt is ducked in the head, one way or another. All these people that think that the coronavirus is a made up disease or is being spread by 5G towers. This 5G thing is something I just can't wrap my head around. Never mind the how or why. But if there was a secret conspiracy, why would the governments go through all that effort and cost exposing their plan to the public when they already control the water supply? I mean, wouldn't that be a much simpler vector to infect your own population? I can't even. That legislator who said the female body has ways to shut down a pregnancy in the event of a legitimate rape. I read about one that was upset about tampon dispensers in the women's bathroom and thought that tampons were sex toys, and also that women could choose when to menstruate. He didn't realize that it would still keep bleeding if you didn't put a tampon in. It was very confusing how a man in his 50s with a wife and kids had such a lack of understanding for the female anatomy. My brother told me I'm avoiding Asian people if I see them on the street or anything. You know, for safety because of the coronavirus. Hes Asian. Our entire family is Asian. Sounds like my family. They think we're white/pawing. Absolutely nobody thinks we are fully white. I promise you. Nobody. My family are Twinkies. Do you not envy us? One of my guides in North Korea Reddit some pics because why not North Koreans by the train tracks Imga North Korean traffic police and police motorcycle Imga plainclothes agent following our group around Imga more North Korean soldiers along the DMZ Imga North Korean sailor guarding the capture US spy ship us Pueblo Imga. Got any more stories about that trip? My cousin's wife got very sick while we were at a wedding in Mexico because she drank no water, only alcohol. She said, there were ice chips in my drinks, so I thought it was enough. Anyways, she complained because at the hospital some of the staff didn't speak English. You're in a Spanish speaking country. I'm half Native American, of the northern Paiute and Washoe tribes, and whenever I meet new people, they always ask what ethnicity I'm as I look very ambiguous, and when I say Native, sometimes they say, oh wow, I didn't know Native Americans still existed. Kinda sad. Back in middle school where we're learning US history and the topic of Native Americans came up. Reservations. Today CT. This kid goes, there are Indians left. I thought we killed them all. The teacher was silent for a good 45 seconds just staring. Then said no oof. Me thinking that I can do things that I like with my money. Well, if you like being in debt, then that's a win-win. My mother and several people in my family believe that God marks people. If someone ultimately has a good soul, they're white, and I'm sure you can guess where it goes from there. If only non-white did shitty things, that would make sense, but you don't even have to look at much of the world to see that is not the case. When I try to bring up that tons of white people do awful things, her logic is they're lost souls that will eventually find their way. Meanwhile, she'll believe a non-white will never find their way, even if they act like they have. The level of delusion this takes is one of the most frightening things to me. Just wait until they figure out that Jesus wasn't white. Quite mild compared to everything else on here, but my college classmate comes to mind. Let's call him R. R is very out of touch, a case of the classic sheltered rich kid who's never experienced the real world. R started his college career by using racial slurs and swearing at people, apparently thinking that was okay. It was not, and he was reported several times before he finally got the message and stopped. Okay, at least he stopped, right? Surely the problem is now over? Oh, wait, He says he'll have no problem buying a house. Given that there is a housing crisis, this will be interesting to watch. And he wants his first job to pay him $50,000 salary, otherwise he will kill himself. He hasn't yet realized that your first job will almost always be at the bottom of the hierarchy and you'll very rarely be paid $50,000. R also thought that it would be very easy to become an English teacher in Japan. In his words, you just fly over and speak English and they'll hire you. He hasn't considered that he will need other things, such as, what was it? Oh yeah, a teaching degree. He also hasn't considered that others might apply to be English teachers in Japan and he'll have to compete with them. Edit. Actually, he apparently doesn't need a degree, but he'll still find it hard because, apparently, finding a place to live can be rather difficult. Although, possibly the worst part is his weird obsession with Hitler. He keeps going on about Hitler being right, and when we protest, he says we're just being snowflakes, apparently disapproving of someone saying that the genocide of 11 million was right is just being a snowflake. When we further explained the difference between being moral and being a snowflake, R countered by telling us that morals are just made by snowflakes for snowflakes, and that he has a right to freedom of speech. That classic go-to excuse for people who are being called out for bad behavior. So yeah, I reckon R is the person I've met who is most out of touch with reality due to his winging it attitude towards general life and his twisted sense of morality and lack of empathy. Edit. I found out from the comments that the Holocaust's death toll was actually closer to 11 million and not 6 million. I'm so sorry for my lack of knowledge about this, and I feel real bad that I didn't know how terrible it really was. To anyone who may have been offended by my inaccuracy, I sincerely apologize and will make sure I have all the facts next time. I have now changed the number. I've also been receiving comments that teaching in Japan is as easy as R claims, but I've had a couple that have said it's actually quite hard, so I can't really tell if I was right or wrong about this one. However, all of those comments agreed that a degree is not needed, so whoops, I was wrong with that one as well. I've added a note in the corresponding paragraph about my error. All of that sounds pretty nuts. To be fair, though, about the teaching English thing, I've known a couple students studying abroad in China who are going for degrees other than teaching or English, who have taught private English lessons to children to make money. And then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute. 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that, by injection inside or almost a cleaning? So it'd be interesting to check that. People who think that, because something that happened is not their fault, they don't have to take responsibility for the outcome. I'm a vet tech and I can't even tell you how many times someone has brought their dog in because it got attacked by a stray dog on a walk and told me, but it's not my fault my dog got attacked, when they didn't have the money to pay for the laceration repair on their dog. What are you gonna do? Chase the dog down and make him hand over his wallet? It's not our fault either. Vet care is part of owning a dog. There was once a vet tech at the office I went to that thought everything was the owner's fault. I once took one of my dogs in because he had a tumor start to come in near his ear, and the whole time the vet was going over what we were gonna do she was scowling at me and she made a few comments like, well, this wouldn't have happened if you took better care of him. And she's like that. Like, bitch, why the duck would I willingly give my dog cancer? Also, how the duck would I even give him cancer? Had to find a new office because the vet decided to make her the lead or whatever. She was in charge of basically everything. He was a nice vet, good too, but he lost all his clients after he put her in charge. He was fine, by the way, got it removed, and he lived for another 6 years to the ripe old age of 17. My mother and father were given $20,000 by my grandparents in 1965. My parents were able to buy a house with the money. Fast forward 50 years, my mother gave me and my sisters $10,000 each. She was unable to understand that we could not buy houses for half the price 50 years later, and accused us of not being good with money because she was able to do it. At the time she was sitting on a ton of money in the bank and was 100% aware that to buy a house in her neighborhood would cost around $1,000,000 so 100 times the amount of money she gave us and 50 times as much money as her parents gave her 50 years earlier. If only I could be so good with money as she WSS. Not saying the $10K wasn't nice. Just saying she expected us to become her neighbors with no understanding of inflation, while thinking half the amount she was given 50 years earlier should be enough, while knowing full well the value of her house. TBH, I think that's where a lot of the generation friction exists between boomers and millennials. Boomers grew up in a different world, different economy, different money paradigm. A large portion of them seem to not grasp inflation and the changes that occurred. Makes they think millennials are crying about nothing. I have an aunt who's never really worked a day in her life because her husband created his own business early on in life. They live in a McMansion, and I was over once and we got to talking about fitness and she told me, oh yeah, we send Pamela to this special training gym. It's only $200 a week. You should try it. The fact that to her it was only $200 really kills me. I made $9.95 an hour at the time. She's nice enough, but not in touch with reality at all. She's nice because she's rich. Hell, if I had all this money, I'd be nice too. My son got the flu shot and turned gay from it. I demand a compensation. Or, I have the coupon. It doesn't matter if it's expired. I have the coupon, so give me the flippin' discount. Edit. Thanks for the replies and likes, guys. The coupon one was my mom. She got so bad that she'd photocopy coupons for things like JCPenney's spend $100 get $20 back, have me crumple them up like newspaper. In her head this made sense, and when the store teller would call her out she'd lose her chiz in the store and then yell at me for not crumpling the fake coupons correctly. Bitch cold bought extra newspapers for $1 and had legitimate coupons, but no, that was too damn logical. A friend of my husband's from college went through a messy divorce recently. The marriage was kind of a sham to begin with. The girl only wanted to marry him because her religious parents wouldn't let them live together unless they were married. But she was clearly in love with someone else and even went so far as inviting said other person into their marriage as a third, which is fine and dandy as long as everyone is consenting. However, I don't think our friend was particularly enthused. Anyways, they got divorced and now she lives with the third person and is very happy, but the whole situation seems to have broken something in our friend. He now spends literally all day posting on Facebook constantly about ridiculous conspiracy theories, talking about private situations between him and his ex-wife in full public view, even going so far as to accuse her of emotional rape, which according to him is even worse than regular rape. He will post the same thing over and over on Facebook. I've seen him post the same fake conspiracy article over 30 times in a row in the span of about 10 minutes. Recently, when Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race, he went off and threatened to literally chop the head off of anyone who was going to vote for Biden. He kept making so many threats that he got the cops called on him. The craziest thing that's happened with him recently is that he saw a picture on his ex-wife's page of her garden in which she used a couple of these wire panel things to prop up some green beans. Apparently those wire panels were actually from some sort of business that they tried to start together, and our friend had a full conversation with himself in the comments of his own post about how it was betrayal and how she was just taunting him by using these things to keep her plants up. I don't think he's handling it very well. I think your friend may be having a mental breakdown. He might need some real, true help beyond what you can give him. My mill told me that Pepsi has aborted fetuses in it and that drinking it will make you gay. As I was drinking a Pepsi, other highlights from her: she doesn't trust doctors and says they're all paid off by the government to hide some ominous truth from everyone else. She believes COVID-19 is a hoax and also believes it comes from 5G. How she believes both of them simultaneously is beyond me. She thinks anxiety and depression are myths and that church is the only answer. She thinks the only reason people don't like Donald Trump is because he's against abortion, and if it weren't for that, 100% of the populace would adore him. I could go on. Edit. I did go on in the comments below. You should have immediately started chugging the Pepsi as soon as she said it. No words. Just Pepsi and solid eye contact. There's a guy I knew whose brain is completely fried, and his perception of everything is just distorted, to put it lightly. I know people who have known him for a long time, before he became the way he is, and I've heard different stories as to what happened. The most common ones being that he did a really nasty and toxic shot of meth and never came back from it, or he just did way too much way too fast over a period of time, and it ducked him up. Either way, it was caused by heavy drug abuse. It's hard to describe the way he is. Has not your typical shits out meth head, has really soft spoken mostly, but says and does some random and incomprehensible things. He has these weird habits of doing chiz, like sitting there and staring at you for literally minutes on end and barely blinking, standing in front of the mirror and mumbling to himself, severe mood swings and outbursts brought on by hallucinations, etc. I think has still in jail right now, but before that he was sleeping in a tent out in the woods by his family's house because they won't let him stay with them, not just because of the way he is, but because they're a bunch of dirty selfish tweakers. He's a really nice guy most of the time, he just has a lot of trouble with keeping people's company and getting their help, but the people he associates with aren't the type who are gonna help him anyway because he has nothing to offer in return. It's a pretty chisty thing to see, and I hope he's able to find some sort of stability someday. Not that guy, but 7 years ago I just started dabbling in weed. I was going to smoke weed with a friend. Turns out it was nutmeg plus weed. Worst trip ever, felt like I was going to die. Woke up feeling weird, in a dreamlike state that lasted a little over a year, and it sucked because it turned me into the quiet kid. During that dream-like state everything was so weird, it was like having to relearn yourself. It caused me to be really in my head, thus causing that creepy stare at you for minutes without blinking. We're not staring at you, just stuck in our mind. We're still there but just in a intense thought and unaware we're staring. Mayo. Just a possibility anyway. Slowly went away. I'm 100% normal now. I was at a bar and some guy was giving an impromptu lecture of why millennials are so broke, and blamed it all on us being lazy students who don't want to work and go to school. When asked what he did, he was a property owner and owned a few apartment buildings. Then someone chimes up with the fact he doesn't own any properties, he manages them for his uncle who pays him to do nothing all day. I knew a girl who cheated on her boyfriend. When he found out, he broke up with her. She said, "You can't break up with me, it has to be mutual. Turn the key." My girlfriend was traveling in China when she was 18 years old and was once randomly approached by a man claiming to be a scientist performing a medical study on feet. He would need to measure the exact dimensions of her feet. For this she obviously had to take off her shoes and socks, and he would also need to take some pictures of her feet as well. Years later she tells this story to me and some friends in a bar. At first we start laughing, but then realize she isn't joking and still doesn't realize what had happened there. We actually had to spell it out for her. I'm sure she made some Chinese foot fetishist's day. Reminds me of my coworker's run-in with a prostitute. We were at work, talking about our weekend, and my coworker, we'll call him Clay because his name was Clay, told us about his night at the bar. Clay had been approached by a good-looking woman, and after a short chat, he asked what she was drinking. It was some fruity looking thing. She offered him a sip, and Clay said he liked it. How much was it? She said something like what would be $200 US, and he recoiled, saying it was far too much. She shrugged and walked off. Now, Clay told this story from the perspective he thought it was wild how much this cocktail cost. It took me a bit to convince him that the woman he shared a drink with was a prostitute and the price was to take her home. It was pretty great when the realization washed across his face. Ultimately harmless, but still a funny situation. Went on one date with a coworker from a place I worked at in high school. After that date she would message me non-stop, from the moment I woke up till I went to sleep. She said that she had fallen in love with me and that we were meant to be together. Horny 17-year-old me was still able to see all the flags, and I broke up with her. When I did, she threatened to kill herself, and I had to track down and call her mother's number to try and prevent the girl from killing herself or anything else. I didn't trust any girls or had a desire for a relationship for a while after that. Props for taking the situation seriously and contacting her mother. That was a very brave, mature move for a 17-year kid. The majority of people ordering to go from restaurants right now. 1. I had a woman scream at me on the phone because her medium rare steak had blood pouring out of the container. I had to put her on hold to laugh out loud. 2. Another woman told me I was ducking a hole because I slammed the phone on her. I didn't. I was busy. I apologized anyway, and she said that's not good enough. 3. Guy comes in with his entire order of to-go that he must have eaten outside and dumps it all over the bar. Not kidding. 4. Guy asks us to make a Long Island iced tea. After explaining we are not offering that right now, he says he'll break into our liquor room and make it himself. He came in. We had to call the cops. These are only a few. As someone working in a bakery right now, I've had my fair share of unruly customers. Since the quarantine and some precautions lifted, I have never seen so many in such a short time. My favorite one so far is a lady that told us we should appreciate working right now because it's her body, her choice, and she chooses for us to be open so she could get her pastries. Rick Snyder, former governor of Michigan. When the Detroit area was wrecked by massive flooding, and most houses with basements flooded a few feet deep and people lost tons of their stuff, and thousands of cars were written off because of the flooding of the roads, Rick let us all know he understood what it was like because one of his vacation properties, multiple, had a leaky roof one time and some carpet got wet. Every single obese person in my family and some friends, they complain how fat they are getting. Then I see them stuff their faces like every meal will be their last. That's fine. None of my business, right? Nope. They make it my business by talking with me how to lose weight. My answer is simple. Put down the fork. They don't like that. They talk about their conditions. The only thing they haven't tried is to simply eat less. Calories in equals calories out. Let's just start there and stop the gluttony. Nope. They state they think they will die if they don't eat how they are used to eating. Completely unrealistic. So here's what I realized about people who struggle with their obesity. You don't get like that by accident. If you are hugely overweight, you've got significant emotional and psychological issues that you are not dealing with in a healthy way. What you will often see is they have a cycle of self-loathing, self-comforting self-loathing. They hate themselves for being fat, but the only means they've ever developed to soothe themselves is eating. So they eat, resulting in more self-loathing, resulting in more eating to soothe themselves. And on and on. Something one of my friends told me is that when you're a fat girl, and presumably a fat guy, your size becomes sort of your excuse for everything. Oh, he won't date me because I'm fat. You can kind of delude yourself into thinking you could date that guy if you lost weight. But if you lose the weight, what if that guy still doesn't want you? They can literally have a terror of being rejected anyway, and so retreat into their obesity, where they always have a safe excuse not to try. Basically, there's layers of issues that contribute to people being obese. It would be easy to say, just put the fork down, fatty, but that doesn't address their self-loathing, fear, insecurities, or underdevelopment of healthy means to care and soothe themselves. Deleted. Oh boy. That'll end well. Those poor kids are going to be so messed up. Golfing on Memorial Day weekend when the country you are attempting to lead through a pandemic is grieving the loss of family and livelihoods. Strangely, this is quite low on his list of alarming delusional behavior. Celebrities broadcasting from their mansions about the suffering of the COVID lockdown. Some people in my country believe that coronavirus does not exist and it is a government hoax to suppress THRM. They spread the misinformation via Facebook Live, and they have thousands of viewers and followers. I'm gonna go on a wild guess that country is one of the top 5 or 10 most coronavirus cases. My Spanish teacher thinks that humanity has never gotten to the moon and on things like spirits and stuff like that. One time when I was very angry, she told me this: hug a tree, that way it will eat your negative energy and transform it into love. Christian, c. 2009. Out of spite of a troller, Chris decides to Photoshop the troll's profile pic onto the twins' towers. He then mocks the troll, telling him he will be hit by a plane, like he did with the towers. Chris inevitably receives backlash. Now here's the kicker. Chris decides that photoshopping the Twin Towers onto a birthday cake would be a genius apology, saying sorry to the troll. Chris Chan is the most out of touch person I've ever heard of. I used to see him pop up from time to time. He had this character called Sonichu, which was a poorly drawn Sonic the Hedgehog, but with some Pikachu features incorporated. He made a video where he offered Sega the rights to the character in exchange for a list of demands, including a job with a 6-figure salary where he retained creative control of the character. Deleted. Deleted. You see a lot of florid schizophrenics as a public defender. It's not uncommon to meet people who are quite unclear as to what plane of existence they are inhabiting. I saw them a lot working in pharmacy, and now that I no longer work in pharmacy, we get our fair share of them in ambulance billing. Fear not all patients. David from 90 Day Fiancé, before the 90 days. Deleted. Any reference to Trump is just cheating. Coworker of mine was having an affair with a married man. Demanded that he leave his wife for her. We asked her why in the hell she would want a committed relationship with someone who cheated on his wife. Oh, he won't cheat on me. I'm sure his wife thought the same thing at one point. She ended up telling his wife, who then divorced him. Surprise, surprise, he then dumped my coworker for squealing on him. Oh my, you watched until the end? That's fucking awesome, dude. Thanks for watching.